So I want to talk about a book that I've just finished recently. The book's called Hear My Heart, and it's a book about Billy Graham. He writes a lot of things in it, but it's not just him who writes in the book. A number of people have written in the book and compiled this sort of collection of chapters on him. And his daughter writes in there. One of his grandsons writes in there, and there's a number of other people in sort of famous in Christendom, I guess, American Christian leaders who've written stuff like Rick Warren, who wrote the Afterword. Yeah. So anyway, the book is a really interesting book. There was a lot of things that surprised me about this book. One of the things that surprised me was how much he really focused on financial integrity and the sort of safeguards that he put in place to make sure that he basically didn't steal money. He had a set wage. He never took profits from the takings of any collections that were given. He always published in local newspapers the money that they made. They were such an open book about finance, and he even started a program that was focused on financial integrity, which really was an amazing thing when you consider how many of these television evangelists have been caught up in financial scandals. The other thing that he did that didn't surprise me at all, because I've heard about it many times before, was his approach to sort of integrity with regards to relationships. He had a kind of pledge which all of his team followed, where they would make sure they were accountable for any relationships that they had with the opposite sex. And he, as far as I'm aware, he's never been caught up in any scandal with a woman, as far as I'm aware, or even with a man. I mean, as far as I'm aware, he's never been caught up in any sort of sexual scandal. Now, the last thing about this book that I found really interesting, there are other things, but this one I found very interesting, was his relationship with Johnny Cash. And he had a problem with his son, Franklin Graham, who was kind of off the rails a bit and wanted to find a way to connect with his son. So he contacted Johnny Cash because his son really liked Johnny Cash. And he built a relationship with Johnny Cash, and it turns out that Johnny Cash was a Christian who'd sort of had a few difficulties with his relationship with God. And then on a number of occasions, Johnny Cash joined Billy Graham on his crusades, and even wrote a book called The Man in White, which was about the relationship between Paul, the Apostle Paul, and Jesus, and made a movie called The Gospel Road, filmed in Israel, about the life of Christ, with a lot of songs which were written by Johnny Cash. So I was really fascinated about his relationship with Johnny Cash, and I learned a lot more about Johnny Cash through this book as well. So I really recommend this book. It's a really good read. I enjoyed it, and I finished it really quickly. I actually really enjoyed reading this book. He's a really level-headed, sober-minded guy, and he's totally not like these fundamentalists in America that you think, okay, he's an American, he's Southern Baptist, so surely he's a fundamentalist, but he's not at all. It's a really, really good book. I really enjoyed reading it, and I recommend that. So read that.